That's the good stuff right here. Hard, soft literature. Yeah. I mean, sort of, kind of. I tell you what, I'll think I'll check it out. You know, I'm not normally one to destroy books, but so I'm just kind of big for it. Hiya folks, Fruit and Doggy here to do another book discussion, and today's book is Firechild by Jack Williamson. This was published in 1986, and it has just about 280 pages. So, fairly good size for a book. And I'm just going to start with the with the book summary. The Firechild, born in a fiery conflagration, the product of genetic manipulation by a brilliant bioscientist, she is a creature unlike any the Earth has ever seen, and she will alter forever the lives of all she touches. To Victor Belcraft, creator of this new being, she is Alpha Mega, the last hope of averting the certain destruction of all life on Earth. Excuse me. To Panchito Torres, an escaped convict who shelters her when she is too tiny to defend for herself, and is in turn miraculously healed by her when his life is virtually ended in a brutal assault by prison guards. She is La Maravillosa. Actually, I think that'd be Maravillosa. Two L's is pronounced Y. Excuse me. To Zax Belcraft, her creator's brother, who lifts her from the ashes of the laboratory where she nearly perished, and who finds himself inexplicably forced to protect and nurture this strangely appealing creature. She is Meg, the only link between himself and his dead brother, perished in the cataclysmic fire that destroyed his brother's lab. To Scorpion, a freelance agent for the USSR, she is a billion-dollar beauty worth incalculable millions if he can sell her to the highest bidder. To General Adrian Clegg, God-fearing crusader against the hell-spawned horror of genetic experimentation, she is the whore of Babylon, a menace to the world that must be destroyed at all costs. Her story is a stirring adventure, a race between the marching forces of greed and evil, and the maturation of a creature of light destined to transform the world with powers so awesome, and yet so simple, that they dwarf the imagination. Jack Williamson, known for his insightful extrapolation of science and fast-paced science fiction, has fashioned a modern classic of technologically triggered international intrigue that will thrill and enthrall those who delight in the wonders of scientific imagination. Rather glowing summary and description, and this is a complaint about the book itself, and it won't show up in the video recording, but the style of the pages, they aren't fully leveled off, they're not fully smooth, and so it's abrasive to thumb your fingers through it and to hold it, and I really hate that. And I don't know what book publishing company does this, but almost always whenever I find a book that is printed in this fashion, I almost always pass on it because I just hate it that much. It is that much of a distraction, and this is one of the few instances where I bothered to get the book because, one, it was small enough that I could read it fairly quickly. It wasn't like a 600, 700 page book, so I wouldn't have to put up with this as much. And then second, the cover, the title, the fact that this gentleman is well respected in the science fiction community, has written a few different books and stories, and then the book summary, I was really intrigued to find out what her powers were going to be. But here's the thing. The title, the front cover picture, and even the phrasing, even the way it describes it, is all a huge misnomer. It is incredibly misleading. And here's how the book starts off. It begins with the scientific facility that want to get his name right, Victor is working at is also, they're producing several different experimentations. They're working on several different things. They have a few different experiments going on. And I forget what the original intent behind one of them was, but it basically, one of the things they've created is a virus that essentially destroys all organic life. And I imagine that as part of the experiment, as they were working on things, it was perhaps devised as a bomb that they could drop in a contained manner, a biological weapon, essentially, a dirty bomb, and they just needed to work on a cure or restraint so they could use it in a controlled way so it wouldn't go way amiss and just destroy an entire ecosystem, or insanely enough destroy the entire planet. And basically the laboratory and the people working there are seen as such are seen as such a liability that they get taken out covertly and basically wipes out an entire town's population. But this virus, it does get contained, it does get controlled, and I really thought it was going to be a more pressing issue because of how it was described and how it was set up. But again, it's fairly quickly contained and controlled. And so as the story progresses, it does shift focus. It does go on to what the title suggests, the main entity, this Meg. But she is not at all, again, what the cover or the title suggests. She is not an energy being. She is not, radiating this immense power that you can just, sense or observe, or, that's impossible to miss. She's not some fire, fire entity or an energy being. She is basically a fabricated, I'm going to call it like an altered human. That's the general form she winds up taking. That of a very small girl, one who, sort of visually, you can kind of see things are a little bit off, things seem a little bit strange, but, nothing that would suggest that lines up with everything else. Because even the way it talks about how the lab is destroyed and she is saved from the burned down laboratory, it suggests that her power went amok and she lost control because she's still in an infantile state, and her powers are just so hard to comprehend and control. But that's not what happened at all. Her powers I guess I'll stop there briefly to say that would be the first, maybe third or fourth of the book, getting through that. And so going on from there, I'm going more into sort of spoiler territory, just for a heads up. But her power is essentially, it's not like just a single thing. She kind of has a I guess psychic ability, in the sense where the brother, it talks about how he develops this strong connection and affiliation with her, and he just feels compelled. And with anybody that she has this bond with, she can basically psychically speak to them. I'm trying to think of the right terms. I apologize for not having the right terms in mind, but telepathically, thank you. I was trying to think of that. She can speak telepathically, doesn't matter the distance, and she also can sense people's general hearts, their character or intentions. So the few people in the story that she latches onto so strongly are people who have good hearts, who are giving, caring, empathetic. And she, the more antagonistic forces, she withdraws from them, she hides from them. And does everything she can to avoid them. And so she does have powers. She can, it talks about how she heals someone who was grievously injured. So she does have healing powers as well. And she is abnormally tough herself, but she's not invulnerable. And despite what the summary says, her powers, I mean, yes, you know, to the normal human being, her powers would be beyond our understanding or ability, of course, but, you know, compared to any comic book character, she would just be very average. So it just seems overly hyped, exaggerated to say that her powers are just beyond comprehension, that she is just an unfathomable force. I mean, even if her powers were more simple, I think if she were an entity of fire, I think that might be a bit more honest or a bit more consistent to that end. And speaking of spoiler territories, I found the ending to be very weak and flat. A lot of the issue with the book is, despite her being described as incredibly powerful, honestly, the vast majority of the book, she's basically being hounded and on the run throughout the entire story. Essentially never gets a single break away from that. So this suffers a little bit from the previous book in my book discussions, Fool's Gold series, where the protagonists are constantly suffering hardships. So she never really gets a break. She never knows a moment's peace. And since she's somewhat parallel between, like a normal human child or a very empathetic, caring human child, it just seems... it's really disturbing trying to read what happens to her, because it just screams of child abuse. That's what it really feels like. Excuse me. So it was somewhat... it wasn't obscenely graphic. You know, this person the author exercised enough good taste to not be too graphic or too obscene with that, but it's still a bit unsettling reading when that's kind of the parallels, that she's like she's like a young girl. Excuse me. Stupid coffee has distracted me. And lost my train of thought because of coffee. Basically, she's like a normal girl. She's never knows a moment's peace. And that's the issue, is that despite her great powers that she supposedly and allegedly has, and to an extent that is shown, the protagonists basically, they ultimately fail. She is killed. That's how the story ends, is that she dies because despite everything that was done to try and save her, to protect her, despite all of the close calls, the narrow escapes, and despite her using her powers very intelligently and as best as she could, she dies. And I think what adds to what adds insult to injury is that when she dies, her molecular structure, her DNA, basically breaks down in such a way that it becomes like a virus, and it infects people, but it's basically like a miracle drug, a panacea. Not Pangea, that's the supercontinent. Can't think of the right word. Sorry, but it's basically the ultimate cure-all. And basically, that's what it does. Any ailments that anybody has, cancer, diseases, they're cured of it. I don't know how far this ability goes. So if somebody's been blind, if they are an amputee, crippled, paralyzed, etc., I don't know how much reconstruction it does, but to whatever extent possible, it heals people completely. And even people who have been killed a while ago, they're restored, they are brought back to life, and it basically reconfigures their personality as well. It alters them, so they're basically, all of their negative traits are brought to zero. So if they were murderous, enraged, if they were hateful and spiteful, all of those traits are reduced and gotten rid of, and then the positive aspects are elevated. So if they were caring, compassionate, insightful, curious, etc., 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 that's brought up. They're peaceful, they're calm, loving, and it just seemed really asinine and really insulting and degrading. That's how I took it, because throughout the book, with these different antagonistic forces who were pretty slimy people, very dislikable, and again, considering what form she was in essence, child abusers, they basically they enjoy the same benefits that genuinely good people get. So I just found it to be really, it just left an unpleasant taste in my mouth to know that instead of her DNA having some sort of an approach or a response, were people who were inherently just wicked and vile and foul people, where they'd be punished and they'd face retribution. No, they're just cured of whatever maladies made them bad people. I don't know, I just found it to be just a really lame ending. Excuse me. And the entire story was just not at all what I expected. And I've already mentioned the misleading aspects, which I don't understand, because this person already has a solid reputation to stand on, so they didn't need to do a bait and switch. It's not like they were trying to sell a story idea that was just so intolerable that it's like, oh, nobody would read it if I just sold it straight, if I came forth and was very forthcoming about what I'm trying to pitch. It's, if they had been, more upfront, more genuine and sincere about what was really going to be going on, didn't have this title and so forth with, it had a lot of connotations that just weren't at all what happened, and I don't care for that. I thought there was another point I was going to make. I'm trying to go through some different thoughts in my head real fast to see if I can catch on to it. The other thing that I thought had a little bit of insult to injury, and this happens early on in the book. I don't feel like I'm giving this away, and I already gave away the ending anyways, but Victor, the one who actually created her in the first place, he dies early on, and the ending doesn't go throughout all of the content, or throughout all of the repercussions and all the consequences of her breaking down and starting to go global as a virus. But with the timeline of this being several days, if not a couple of weeks, I would presume that his death was too early in the town that was wiped out, a bunch of innocent people. So I think that's another thing that left a bad taste in my mouth, is the entire town that was wiped out, the man who actually created her in the first place, they're just left out in the dust. They're completely left to obscurity. Too bad, so sad. He died a little too early. And conversely, she didn't die early enough. So, sorry, nothing we can do. And I think that makes it all the worse. But that's my interpretation. I really think this could have been done a lot better. I like the story to a certain degree. It was, I was able to follow along with the storyline, did shift perspectives, but it wasn't too complicated to follow along with. But I would admit that the ending ruined it for me, and I just didn't care for it ultimately. And appropriately enough, Firechild, because I felt so swindled, I'm gonna say this is a burn it category. It's like, if you're really that assured of yourself and you think you're a hotshot, then at least, I don't know. I'm spinning my wheels, I'm repeating myself, so I'm just gonna let it go, leave it at that. But anyways, folks, have a good one, and I'll see you later. Bye.